Hi everybody, I decided to put a short video together just to help us with starting our Ninalika sock knit along. This is the sock that we're going to be knitting, and the first week covers the Judy's Magic cast on, so the toe section, then the colour work here, the short colour work, and then it covers the remainder of the foot, and then the second week is the heel and gusset. And then the last week is the leg and the cuff. So I'm going to show you how I did the Judy's Magic cast on and the colour work and the leg, so that you can then get to this point ready for the following week. So I've used the Judy's Magic cast on here, and then I've got the pink yarn for the colour work, and then I knit the sock to the measurement that I needed to get to the heel. And I would say persevere with Judy's Magic cast on. I've never done a terp sock before, and it took me 2 goes to really get the hang of it. I'd say the first 2 or 3 rows are really fiddly, but then after that it's much easier and straightforward. I'm using DPNs, double point needles, to knit my sock, but I know that there's others in the group. I think Jane Rope is using a short circular needle, and I know Elaine Kirkham is using the magic loop method. So you can always ask somebody in the group how they tackled certain areas of it. It's not a difficult sock. I would say for me, literally learning the Judy's Magic cast on has been the tricky part so far, and then I haven't done the heel yet, so that will be a new challenge for me. Okay, so don't forget, in the files section of the group is a full printout of all the techniques that you'll need for this sock project, and on each of the pictures, if you click on them, it takes you to the YouTube video to show you how to do the Judy's Magic cast on, or the make one right, make one left as well, which you'll need for the Judy's Magic cast on. So don't forget to use that. And then I've put all the information relating to this sock knit along in the topic section, and it's the Ninalika sock knit along topic that you need to click on, and there you'll see Jane has added sort of a blow by blow account of what you've got to do to cast on for the sock for the toe section. So always use that as a point of reference as well, because that's really good. Okay, enough waffling, let's get on. So for Judy's Magic cast on, if you've all watched it, you don't need too long a piece of the tail hanging down. You need to keep your needles very tight, and the tail goes through the middle of the 2 needles, and the working yarn falls down the back and comes to the front. And then I've got to work around the camera here. I like to grab the tail to the back and then the working yarn to the front in that slingshot motion that Judy talks about. Okay, and so what we're going to do is sort of a seesaw motion of bringing the tail yarn to the front and over the first, and let me just zoom in a bit. So that tail yarn's going to come over the first needle and down through the middle. Keep your needles fairly tight, and then your working yarn, which is at the front, is going to come through the middle and then over the back of the needle. So the tail yarn over the front of the needle and down the middle, and the working yarn up through the middle of the needles and over the back needle. And it's just a seesaw motion, so tail yarn over the front needle, down the middle, and the working yarn through the middle and over the back needle. And so for the small size, you need to have 8 stitches on each of the front and back needle, or for the middle size you need 10 on each needle, or for the large size you need 14 on each. So I'm going to carry on and do that. So when you have your stitches cast on, so I have 8 stitches on both needles as I'm doing the small size, you can see your yarns are hanging down here, and you're going to just turn the needles so that the yarns that were on your left are now on your right, and you can see those hanging down. And then the other trick is you're just going to twist your working yarn, so pull that just around the tail, and that just pulls it a bit tighter. Gosh, I'm all fingers and thumbs doing this. Just like that. So this is your tail here and your working yarns at the back. And then what you have to do is knit these stitches here, and then you will turn the needles around and you'll knit back along these stitches. And this is probably one of the most fiddliest bits because it's very tight. So let me just get that tail out of the way. So you're going to go into this first stitch and just knit that first stitch. Oops, already pulled it tight. Oops. Oh yeah, one tip. Pull this second needle with the second stitches longer than the first, and that stops the other stitches falling off. So that's my first stitch. So I've just knit across the first needle, and I'm just going to turn the needle. You can see my tail is here on the left, and I'm just going to now pull this back needle so that it's longer than the needle I'm going to be knitting on, just so that these stitches don't slip off this needle. And then I'm just going to knit along here. And just a tip, always when you're doing this first row that I've done, try and hold this tail tight, and that just helps with those first couple of stitches. Okay, so I'm going to knit along this back needle. So I knit first on this needle, turned it, and I've just worked this needle to here. So I'm just going to turn my needles to start the next row. So you should have your working yarn on your first needle and your tail on your second needle, and you can see your first lot of stitches are just there. Okay, so the next part of the pattern asks us, after we've knit that first round, is that we need to knit this first stitch, and then we need to make one right here, and then we're going to go right to just before the last stitch, make one left here, and then knit this stitch, and then repeat it again. So by turning the needle, knit one, and this will be a make one right, go to the end, make one left, and finish on there. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to see if I can do this on camera, but I'm sort of a bit cat-handed here. So knit the first stitch. Whoops, remember to pull that second needle so it's slightly longer so the stitches don't come off. So knit the first stitch, and then I'm going to pick up, I don't know if I can get any closer. So I want to show I'm going to pick up this bar in between, oh I don't know if you can see, the light's not very good, pick up this bar in between these two knobbles here. So I'm just going to put my needle in, I'm holding the stitch I've just knit. I'm going to pick up the bar, it's really fiddly this first bit, pick up the bar and stick it on the needle that I'm currently working on. So this is my make one right, and then I'm just going to put the needle in. Oh, this is where I wish I had higher sharps or chowgu, because they've got a sharper point than these knit pro zings. Okay, and then I'm going into the front of that stitch and just knitting it. So I didn't get all of it there. Right, I think that's it. Knitting it, and then knitting to the last stitch. Okay. And then it's the make one left, so again I'm going to be picking up in between these two knobbles here, that stitch there, and I'm going to be putting it on slightly differently. Whoops, let me just push that needle down. So I'm going to be putting that needle in that way. Always hold your stitches as much as you can and keep the needle from coming off. And then we need to knit into the back of that. Now I always find that that's always really tight to try and get this needle into the back of this stitch. So I always put my needle into the front of it, and then I do a seesaw, so I sort of then come round like that. So I'll do that again just to show you. So it's on the needle, but we need to knit into the back, and I find that quite tight there. So I come into the front with this needle and then pull the stitch off of the back needle and then go into the front of it. And then my needle's in the right position to come round and knit into the back. And that's my make one left and then knit the last stitch. Okay. And then all I'm going to do is turn the needle around, so my tail is on the back, the front needle on the left, and then I've got my working yarn on the front, and then I'm just going to do the same. Knit this stitch, make one right in between, go to the end, make one left, and then knit the last stitch. So I've just done round 1 and round 2, so this is the finishing of the knit one, make one right, knit to almost the end, then make one left and the last knit. So now I'm going to go on and continue as the pattern says. I can't say what that is because this, I think from the 1st of January is a paid pattern, so I can't then tell you what the pattern says, but check the next part of the pattern because it's just a repeat of what we've been doing, and then I'll come back to you when I've done the next part. Okay, so I now have 14 stitches on each of my 2 needles, so 28 in total, and you can see the very tip of the toe is starting to form. So for the next part of the pattern, don't forget you always keep this needle in the previous bit, always keep this needle longer, it will help you to get to this stage. So the next part of the pattern is we've got to increase the stitches now until we have so 56 stitches total for me, 64 for the medium, or 72 for the large size. And this is where, for those of you that are knitting on DPNs, this is where I now start putting my sock onto 4 DPNs. I find it much easier. So I think the next round is just a knit round. So I'm going to use a stitch marker as well. So I'm literally just going to divide these stitches in half. So I'm going to knit the first one. And then I'm going to put my stitch marker on that needle so that I know that's the beginning of my round. And then, oops, knit 2, knit 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, push that to the middle, and then get my next needle and carry on. Oops, let's pull that round. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I've now got 3 needles, and then I'm just going to do the same. Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, tight stitch, 6, 7. And now I have my toe on my 4 needles. I've got my stitch marker to show me where I always start, and now I'm much happier that I've got my 4 DPNs ready to go for the next section. And so the next section is repeating rounds 1 and round 2. And so you'll find now that you'll make one right and make one left will be much easier because there's more space and it's not so tight. And so you continue doing that until, as I say, you get to your 56, 64 or 72 stitch count. Okay, so I've now completed my toe, and I now need to move on to the next part of the pattern, which is to work the 8 rounds. So if I show you here, so this is the toe that I did on the other sock. So I worked here on the toe. Oops. Now I've got to work these 8 rounds here, from here to here, to get ready for the colour work. So here is the toe section finished, and I've started on the foot with the 8 rows that I've completed. Now I'm ready for the colour work, and you can see here, this one I've prepared already, that the colour work is a fairly simple pattern. It's a 2x2 stitch of, in this case I've used pink with my grey, and you'll see that on the chart it says on the 4th row and the 6th row at the beginning of the rows that you slip the stitch. Now don't get confused, because when you slip the stitch on the 4th row, you're actually going to be slipping the, let me think, you're going to be slipping the grey stitch, I think it is, and then on the 6th row you're going to be slipping a pink stitch. So especially for the 6th row where it looks confusing, because your first stitch is actually going to be pink and then you're going to continue right around with the grey, it actually works out, and you can see here that it works out completely, and you don't have an odd pink stitch amongst the grey or a grey stitch amongst the pink. So just follow the chart exactly. I will do one round of colour work for you to see how I do it, but there's many ways that you can do colour work, and you may have done it already and understand. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a method that I use for colour work. You can do it with using your left and your right hand, but if you've not done colour work before, sometimes, although it's a bit slower, you might find it easier. So I'm not going to do all of it, because obviously this is going to be a paid pattern now. So the first stitch is knit using the main yarn, and then the next stitch is using the contrast yarn, and all I do is I take the contrast yarn and I just hold on to the tail of it and I knit it straight away, and I just keep hold of the actual yarn tail with my 2 fingers as I'm going, and then I go back to my main stitch, my main yarn, and then I sort of lay that forward and keep the contrast one at the back, and then I lay that down and then take the main yarn and then knit again, and then take from the back the contrast yarn again, and then lay that down and take the main one. Now this is a very slow way of knitting with colour work, but if you've not done it before, it saves your yarn getting tangled, so it keeps your 2 yarns separate. So you can see that I've got my 2 separate yarns, and then the strings don't get tangled up. So that's all I'm going to show you for how I do colour work, and all I would say is when you get to the end of the colour work cut the contrast colour yarn. It doesn't tell you to do that, but you can cut it so that you can sew it in later. And then don't forget, like I said, on row 4 and row 6, it says to slip that stitch, and it will be in the wrong colour yarn, that particular stitch, but it doesn't matter, it works out in the end. So what you should have then for this week is the toe finished, the colour work, and then stocking stitch right up until the heel. So that will be it for this week, and then next week we'll concentrate on the shadow wrap heel and the mini gusset as well.